Now, Act 4, he calls redemption. After the third cup, after the Afikomen, the Seder changes to the future from the past. That's important. Act 4, part 4 of the Seder, starting with pour out your wrath on the Gentiles, which we'll talk about in a moment, moves to the future, meaning Elijah, right? So, and I want to talk a little bit about that. The first 3 parts about the Seder are the past, including the foretellings, right? The 4th part of the Seder is about the future. The future is pour out your wrath among the nations that did not know you. We're not talking about the Holocaust. That's not what that talks about. Now it is. And it's proper that we integrate that into the Seder. That's proper. But in its context, it's talking about nations that will not acknowledge the unity of God, God's kingship. And why does Elijah come in there? Elijah comes in at that point because Elijah is a protector from transitions, fearful transitions in Judaism. So when we say pour out your nations, rather than we open the door, and the nations sometimes would run in, right? At Easter time, you know the whole thing. They would come in the door. So when you open the door in a hostile environment, right? Mostly in the Christian world, not always in the Muslim world. Sometimes, but not as much as in the Christian world. You open the door, you could get your brains beat up, right? So you invoke Elijah. Please protect us. Where else does Elijah occur to protect us? The bris, in the Brit Milah, the chair is called the chair of Elijah. Why? Elijah protects Jews in transition moments. I'll give you another place, Elijah, that some of you know. In the Havdalah on Saturday night, you go from Shabbat to weekday. Eliyahu Hanavi. We're making a transition from the tranquil Shabbat to a new week, and whatever that brings, please, Elijah, come in and protect us. There are all kinds of amulets from the Middle Ages, not from the ancient world, with Elijah. Elijah's pictures of him and all kinds of sayings about Elijah. Elijah was the Jewish protector in transition moments. So now we talk about redemption. Curse those nations that will not know you. Bring in Elijah. And we'll get to the end songs in a little while. That's all projecting to the future of the Jewish people, not just the past. And the ultimate Pesach will be when the Messiah comes. That's why we talk about open the door to see if the Messiah is here, etc., etc., etc. So, and that's why now in modern times, and it's proper to update this stuff. I'm trying to give you the framework. In modern times, and section number 4, it is proper to acknowledge in your Seder the state of Israel for the same reason. It is the place to acknowledge the Shoah for the same reason. It is the place to, this year, and I want to make a suggestion to you, we always talk about the Warsaw Ghetto at part 4. Before we talk about Israel, you know, in the Haggadah, there's the revolt of the Warsaw Ghetto, this year I would suggest at your Seder you do something a little different. Not to ignore the Warsaw Ghetto, obviously, but it's a different, this is the 70th anniversary this year of the Shoah in Hungary. All right? The Shoah started later in Hungary, as you know, since the end of the war. You know the history. And the Hungarian Shoah was very vicious because the Nazi thing was deteriorating. You know the whole story. So if you go onto the internet, and I'm doing this in my own Seder, I'm not talking about the Warsaw Ghetto. You can go onto the internet without all the history, because people don't want to hear the details. There are pictures there on the internet. Go to Hungarian Holocaust, and they have pictures of some of you who have been in Budapest. I was there about 6 years ago. they have pictures there of the monument on the Danube River, the beautiful Danube River on the bridge, where they threw Jews over. They had to leave their shoes on the ledge, and they threw them into the icy water. Hungarians, and I don't know, 2,000 of them froze to death to start the Shoah. And you have you can see the photograph, and if you pass it around your Seder, of the monuments. You have shoes on the Danube Bridge there that were put there, I think, by the Hungarian government, and it's a monument. Then you have, now in the state of Israel, in Yad Vashem, wonderful photographs there of Yad Vashem marking the 70th anniversary, and have wonderful pictures there of the Hungarian survivors now, 2 months ago, with their grandchildren, who are, some of them were in the Israeli army, walking, and above in the back is a cattle car on a platform that they put up there that was used in Hungary. So you can just show them one of those pictures, and pass them a photostat, and pass them on your Seder. So my point is, from number 4, redemption is to the end, is projecting to the future, ultimate Pesach, which is the coming of the Messiah. All right? Now, I'm going to stop here. I got a lot else to tell you about other stuff. I want to go to some sundry parts, but this is the general structure of the Seder. Questions or comments? This is the time, please, right now. Yes?
Well, the 4 cups of wine, each one is supposed to be symbolic of something that God did. One of it is supposed
The language in the Torah.
Right. Now, what is it for? I don't remember.
There's 4 terms used in, remember, where is the story essentially of Pesach chapter 12 of Exodus?
Right.
Then Deuteronomy adds later on, like I told you all that. So you have, I'm not sure I remember them all. I shall save you, I shall bring you out, I shall save you from Egypt. I shall bring you out of Egypt. I will redeem you from Egypt. I will bring you to a new land. There's a 5th term that I don't remember. There's actually 5. I don't remember the 5th term, and that's why you have the cup of Elijah. The 5th term, which is not accounted for in the other 4, became a justification for the cup of Elijah. All right, let me just move ahead. Let's talk about the 4 questions. Let's take some sundry things here. The 4 questions in this Haggadah on page 8, we looked at it in the Mishnah. Remember which one was different in the Mishnah? What's the one in the Mishnah of that? Yeah, what? Roasting meat. Eat roasted meat, which we don't do. Now, we substitute reclining, I think, for that, right? But in the Mishnah, the 3rd question is roasted meat. By the way, some Sephardic communities still eat roasted meat at the Seder. There's a whole discussion in the Talmud, which I was on a webinar this week. Some of you know that in the summers, I like to study at the Institute in Jerusalem, which I hope to do this summer. I always learn a lot and bring it back to the congregation. It's a very serious institute in Jerusalem for 2 weeks. They have lay programs, but rabbis of all persuasions come to a special program, and you study in groups, and then they have a lecture. It's a wonderful program. Anyway, so the teacher was showing us a passage in the Talmud that I've never seen before, where a Jew named Todros, Todros, Roman name, right? Todros lived in Rome, and it says he ate roasted meat on the Arab Pesach. So it was a no-no. So in Rome, right? So the rabbi sent him a missive from Jerusalem, and they said, you better stop this. You better stop this. You're eating roast. Why? Because when you eat roasted meat with your group, it looks like you're in the temple, and you're feigning, or you're trying to stop eating roasted meat. You can eat anything, but not roasted meat. So then they have different versions. Well, it was like roasted meat. They try to explain it, but it's a very interesting passage. the lecturer who was talking about it and showing us the source, they had sent out the sources before, so we actually had them in front of us. He said that, I didn't know this, but that some Sephardic communities today still eat roasted meat at the Seder, purposely. The problem is that in the Ashkenazi community, it's not a mandate, or it's not required to say that you eat roasted meat, because we don't live we're not with the temple, and we don't want to confuse the two things. Those of you who know a little bit about Jewish history know that in Egypt, in Alexandria, and in Elephantine was I think it was a Syrian colony at the end of the Nile. Those two places, they sacrificed the Paschal lamb after the temple had been destroyed. They didn't care. So in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, in the Sephardic community, the embryonic Sephardic community, they were sacrificing the Paschal lamb irrespective of the rabbis from Jerusalem trying to maintain the order. He said, stop it, you can't do that. Interesting, right? Anyway, okay, so the 4 questions are one, I think a lot of the kids know this, but just to say it, they're not questions, they're statements. So you have, why is this night different than other nights? It's the question, and you have the 4 explanations. Now, what's the oldest part of the Haggadah? The Hallel. We haven't talked about that. Turn to page 24 just for a minute. 24. This is right before you eat. All right? So you have, look on 24. You know it. Many of you come to shul regularly. You know it. Look. It says, raise the cup of wine and say, see it? Therefore, it's our duty to say Hallel. So you say Hallel from 24 to 25. Then you drink the 2nd cup, right? Then you start washing your hands, the motzi, matzah, you eat. And after the eating, on page 34, you say the rest of the Hallel. So the meal is sandwiched between the Hallel. Why? The oldest part of the Haggadah, before we had the 4 questions, before we had the 10 plagues, before we had everything else, after the destruction of the temple, was saying the Hallel. Why? Because it says in the Hallel on page 5, in the 3rd paragraph, look on 25, page 25, when Israel went forth from Egypt, right? The house of Jacob from a people of strange tongue went out of Egypt. So the oldest part of the Haggadah, before all the rest, we know. How do we know it? It's in the Mishnah. We read it. Remember those of you who studied the Mishnah development. Remember that there was a part of it. Well, how far do you say the Haggadah? Where do you start saying it? Well, you got to include when we went out of the house of Egypt, because that's telling the story. So the Hallel is there, because it tells the story not just for Egypt, not all of it, most of it. Number 2, the Hallel's theme is something else. Life out of death. If you read it, it's death and life. Winter, spring. And the 3rd reason you say the Hallel is because the meal, I know everybody wants to eat. I got all the jokes. I know all the jokes like you do. But the meal is a sacred meal. So in order to say, hey, this is not just like yesterday eating or tomorrow, this is sacred. So we do the Hallel before, we eat the meal, we do the Hallel afterwards, and those are the 3 reasons the Hallel's in there. And the Hallel was the bare bones of the Haggadah before a lot of the other stuff we know was added right after the destruction of the temple. Okay.